"We don't serve discount brides here." The words sliced through the crystal chandeliered air of Manhattan's most exclusive bridal boutique, each syllable dripping with practiced disdain. Sarah's reflection fractured in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors, her dreams of the perfect wedding dress shattering alongside it. Around her, designer-clad women barely concealed their smirks behind perfectly manicured hands, their own five-figure gowns rustling like whispered judgments. In the corner of the boutique, a figure in oversized sunglasses slowly lowered her bridal magazine, her attention caught by the unfolding scene. The boutique's reputation preceded it, ethereal dreams, where New York's elite found their perfect wedding moments, price tags starting in the tens of thousands. Sarah had saved for months just to step through these doors, her teacher's salary stretched to its breaking point. The sales consultant, Margot, circled her like a designer-suited shark, each glance at Sarah's modest handbag and simple dress adding another layer of frost to her professional veneer. The other brides-to-be watched the spectacle unfold, entertainment for their afternoon fitting sessions. Margot's voice carried across imported marble floors. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at David's Bridal? They cater to more budget-conscious brides." The words hung in the air like crystal droplets from the chandeliers, beautiful, sharp, and cold. Sarah clutched her Pinterest inspiration photos, her fingers trembling. That's when the woman in the corner stood up, sunglasses coming off to reveal eyes that had portrayed everything from a princess to a fashion magazine editor. Anne Hathaway had seen enough. Sarah's fingertips traced the edge of her inspiration photos, childhood dreams captured in glossy magazine cutouts. She'd spent countless nights imagining this moment, visiting the boutique's website, studying every detail of their handcrafted gowns. Her fiancé, Mark, had offered to ask his parents for help, but she'd refused. This was supposed to be her moment, earned through extra tutoring sessions and summer school classes, saving dollar by dollar. The boutique's interior seemed to close in around her, each crystal reflection multiplying the judgmental stares. A bride in a $15,000 Vera Wang shifted away as if Sarah's target dress might somehow contaminate her designer fitting. Another woman whispered something behind her Hermes scarf, triggering a wave of carefully concealed laughter. The sound echoed off the marble floors, mixing with the gentle tinkling of the chandeliers above, creating a symphony of exclusion. Margot's heels clicked against the floor as she approached again, this time clutching a store policy book like a shield. Her red-soled Louboutins probably cost more than Sarah's entire wedding budget, a fact her expression made clear she was well aware of. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Margot announced, her voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone could hear. "Our consultations require a minimum deposit to ensure clients are—" She paused, letting her gaze drift meaningfully over Sarah's simple outfit. "Serious about their investment in our exclusive collections. We find it helps maintain the boutique's standards." The policy book opened with a practiced flourish. Several phones emerged from designer purses, their cameras discreetly capturing what promised to be prime social media content. Sarah felt her cheeks burn as Margot continued, each word precisely chosen for maximum impact. "Our starting price point is $25,000. The consultation deposit alone is $5,000. Non-refundable, of course." A young woman in Chanel tweeted something, causing her friends to snicker. Sarah caught a glimpse of the hashtag #wrong store. Her vision blurred as she spotted her own reflection in the mirrors, small, insignificant, surrounded by a fortress of luxury and judgment. Behind her, Anne Hathaway silently set down her magazine, her expression darkening with each passing moment. "I can pay the consultation fee," Sarah whispered, her voice threatening to break. Her hands trembled as she reached for her carefully saved envelope. 2 years of lunch breaks spent tutoring struggling students, every extra dollar tucked away toward this dream. Margot's perfectly lined lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Oh, honey," she said, the endearment wielded like a weapon, "that's sweet. But let's be realistic. Even if you could manage the consultation fee, our gowns require multiple fittings, each with its own charges, the alterations alone." She gestured at Sarah's figure with a manicured hand. "Would be substantial. We wouldn't want you to waste your savings." The entire boutique seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Sarah's reaction. Phones recorded discreetly, their owners anticipating social media gold. But before Sarah could respond, a voice cut through the tension, warm, strong, and unmistakably familiar to anyone who'd ever seen The Devil Wears Prada or The Princess Diaries. "Actually," Anne Hathaway said, standing up, "I believe there's been a mistake. Sarah is here as my personal guest." The silence that followed was absolute. Phones that had been discreetly recording now emerged openly, their owners no longer pretending to be subtle. Margot's professional mask slipped for a moment, her carefully maintained composure fracturing like a dropped champagne flute. The other customers froze in their designer dresses, suddenly aware that they had become supporting characters in a very different kind of viral moment. Anne's heels clicked deliberately against the marble floor as she crossed the room, each step echoing with the confidence of someone who had played both royalty and fashion industry icons. She moved with the grace that had earned her an Oscar, but her eyes held the steel of someone who had faced Hollywood's own brutal hierarchies and emerged stronger. "Sarah and I have been planning this appointment for weeks," Anne continued, her voice carrying the perfect blend of warmth and authority. She placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, the gesture both protective and deliberate. "Though I have to say I'm fascinated by this deposit policy you mentioned, especially since I wasn't asked for one during my own consultation last month." The other customers' expressions transformed from mockery to mortification as they realized their own roles in the scene they'd been gleefully documenting. The young woman with the number "Wrong Store" tweet frantically began deleting her post, but several others in the room were already capturing this new development, their captions writing themselves. Margot's professional training warred visibly with her panic. Her fingers clutched the policy book tighter, knuckles whitening against the leather cover. "Miss Hathaway, we had no idea. Of course, for your guest, we would be happy to make an exception to our usual—" "An exception?" Anne's smile remained gracious, but her eyes sparkled with the same fire that had helped her portray Fantine in Les Miserables. "Oh no, I don't want any exceptions. I want exactly what every bride deserves: respect, dignity, and the joy of finding her perfect dress." She turned to Sarah, her voice softening. "I hope you don't mind me stepping in. I was actually here for my sister's dress fitting, but I couldn't help overhearing. Your students' letters about their dedicated tutor who makes math magical? They're all over your Instagram. The prom dress you altered for that student who couldn't afford one? The fundraiser you organized for the school's art program? That's the kind of investment that matters." The boutique's atmosphere shifted palpably. The other brides-to-be who had been smirking earlier now looked at their own reflections with new eyes, as if questioning what their expensive dresses really said about them. One woman quietly slipped her phone into her purse, shame coloring her cheeks, as she remembered her earlier recording. The chandelier light that had seemed so harsh on Sarah now seemed to soften, embracing rather than exposing. Margot's composure crumbled entirely as the boutique's owner emerged from her office, drawn by the commotion. "Is everything all right out here? I heard—" She stopped abruptly, recognition dawning as she spotted Anne Hathaway standing protectively beside Sarah. "Actually," Anne said, her voice carrying the perfect mix of grace and steel, "we were just discussing your store's fascinating policies about deposits, standards, and what makes someone worthy of a dream dress." She gestured toward Sarah's Pinterest photos, which had fallen to the floor during the confrontation. though personally, I'm more interested in hearing about Sarah's vision for her wedding. The photos revealed carefully annotated details, vintage lace patterns, modest alterations to make designer styles more affordable, thoughtful notes about sustainable materials. They spoke of someone who didn't just want to wear a beautiful dress, but understood and appreciated the artistry behind it. The owner, Mrs. Chen, picked up one of the photos, her experienced eye catching the detailed notes. Her expression shifted from concern to genuine interest as she studied Sarah's annotations. 25 years of dressing brides had taught her to recognize true appreciation for craftsmanship. "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen said slowly, shooting a pointed look at Margot, "we should start this consultation over. After all, our boutique was founded on the belief that every bride deserves her moment to shine." She turned to Sarah, her voice warming. "Would you tell me about your dream dress? These notes about vintage lace techniques. They remind me of my own early days as a designer." Sarah's hands trembled as she spread out her inspiration photos on Mrs. Chen's private consultation table, each image carefully preserved and annotated. The boutique's owner leaned forward, her experienced eyes catching details that Margot had never bothered to see. Anne sat quietly beside Sarah, her presence both supportive and watchful. "This alteration here," Mrs. Chen said, pointing to one of Sarah's sketches, "you've modified the Valentino neckline to preserve the elegance while reducing fabric costs, and these notes about repurposing vintage lace." She looked up at Sarah with new respect. "You understand construction?" Sarah's voice grew stronger as she explained, "I teach geometry and art. I've always been fascinated by how patterns come together, how shapes and structures create something beautiful. When my student Maria couldn't afford a prom dress, we studied designer patterns together and recreated one from scratch." The story spread through the boutique like ripples in still water. The other brides-to-be, who had been pretending not to listen, drew closer. Even Margot, standing stiffly by the door, couldn't maintain her practiced disdain as Sarah described teaching teenage girls not just about dresses, but about self-worth, creativity, and the art of making beauty accessible to everyone. Mrs. Chen's fingers traced the delicate drawings. "You know," she said softly, 30 years ago, I was a young immigrant with nothing but a sketchbook and a dream. No one would give me a chance, except one person who saw past my broken English to the designs in my notebook." Mrs. Chen stood suddenly, her decision made. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into the back room. The boutique held its breath. Anne squeezed Sarah's hand, recognizing the weight of the moment. When Mrs. Chen returned, she carried a garment bag that looked different from the boutique's usual sleek covers, older, well-preserved, but clearly from another era. "My first wedding dress design," she explained, carefully unzipping the bag, "the one that started everything." The gown that emerged wasn't just a dress, it was a piece of history. Handcrafted lace cascaded down like frozen tears, each pattern telling a story of determination and artistry. The construction was impeccable, the kind of work that spoke of countless hours of patient dedication. "I see the same love in your sketches," Mrs. Chen told Sarah, her voice thick with emotion. "The same understanding that a wedding dress isn't just silk and lace, it's dreams made tangible." She turned to Margot, whose expression had transformed from disdain to dawning comprehension. "This is what we lost sight of, chasing exclusivity. We forgot that true luxury isn't about the price tag. It's about the heart sewn into every stitch." Anne watched the scene unfold, her own eyes glistening. She'd played countless roles, but no script could have captured the genuine emotion of this moment. Around them, phones had lowered, their owners no longer seeking viral content, but witnessing something more profound. A reminder of what truly made something valuable. Mrs. Chen gently lifted her vintage creation. "Sarah, would you like to try this on? I've preserved it all these years, waiting for someone who would understand its true value." Her eyes met Sarah's in the mirror, someone who sees beyond the surface to the soul of the craft. The boutique's atmosphere transformed as Sarah emerged from the dressing room. The gown, with its timeless elegance and intricate detailing, seemed to have been waiting decades for this exact moment. The chandelier light caught every carefully preserved detail, creating a halo effect that made even the most expensive dresses in the showroom fade into the background. "This," Anne said softly, "is what a bride should look like, radiating joy, not just wearing wealth." She turned to the other customers, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned similar lessons in Hollywood's glittering wilderness. We get so caught up in labels and price tags that we forget what makes something truly precious. Margot stepped forward, her designer heels silent on the marble floor for the first time. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice carrying a new humility, "I think I need to relearn what you tried to teach me when I first started here." She turned to Sarah, years of practiced superiority melting away. "Would you tell me about these alteration techniques you used for your students? Perhaps we could make this kind of beauty accessible to more brides." The vintage dress sparkled under the lights, its story now intertwined with a new chapter of transformation. In that moment, everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just a bride finding her dress, but the rebirth of something precious that had almost been lost. The story of what happened at Ethereal Dreams Bridal Boutique that afternoon spread faster than any planned social media campaign could have managed. But it wasn't the videos of public shaming that went viral. Instead, it was the images of Sarah in Mrs. Chen's vintage masterpiece, Anne Hathaway helping to adjust the train, while the boutique's owner explained the history of each handcrafted detail. The hashtag #TrueBridalBeauty began trending as Sarah's students shared stories of their beloved teacher who had taught them that elegance came from character, not credit cards. Photos emerged of the prom dresses she'd helped create, each one a testament to the belief that everyone deserved to feel beautiful. Mrs. Chen announced a new apprenticeship program with Sarah as her first consultant, bringing her unique perspective on making high-end designs accessible to brides of all backgrounds. Even Margot found herself transformed, her Instagram now featuring behind-the-scenes stories of dress alterations and the art of finding beauty in unexpected places. Anne's involvement sparked a wider conversation in the fashion industry about accessibility and true value. In interviews, she spoke about witnessing the moment when luxury remembered its soul, her words carrying the weight of someone who had seen both sides of the velvet rope. Fashion magazines that had once featured only designer price tags now ran special features on Sarah and Mrs. Chen's collaboration, highlighting their innovative approaches to making bridal dreams achievable. The boutique itself underwent a renaissance. While it still carried exclusive designs, a new line called Chen and Sarah emerged, featuring carefully crafted gowns that combined high-end artistry with accessible pricing. The waiting list grew not because of exclusivity, but because every bride who entered now received the same respect, regardless of their budget. Sarah's geometry students attended the launch of the new collection, beaming with pride as their teacher explained how mathematical principles could transform fabric into fashion. The event was covered not just by style blogs, but by educational platforms, highlighting how creativity could bridge socioeconomic divides. On Sarah's wedding day, she wore more than just Mrs. Chen's restored vintage dress. She wore the story of transformation it represented. The boutique's entire staff attended the ceremony, including Margot, who had become one of the strongest advocates for their new inclusive approach to bridal fashion. Anne sent a handwritten note with a sketch from her own wedding dress, now part of the boutique's inspiration wall. But perhaps the most touching moment came during the reception, when Sarah's students performed a surprise presentation. They had created a video documenting how their teacher's belief in making beauty accessible had changed not just their prom experiences, but their understanding of self-worth. Mrs. Chen, watching from the audience, wiped away tears as she saw her own journey reflected in each story. The viral moment that began with rejection had blossomed into something far more meaningful, a reminder that true elegance isn't found in exclusivity, but in the moments when we open doors that others would close, creating beauty that everyone can share.